Hello and welcome back to the final part of this lecture on budgets and fiscal policy. And in this final video, we're going to look at the market for money using the model by John Maynard Keynes. In the market for money, as he conceptualized it in this theory, there's a supply for money, which is determined by the central bank. Because one of the main responsibilities of government is to make sure there's a functioning money system. And they determine the supply of money. So the central bank determines the supply of money, and that doesn't depend on interest rates. It's a policy variable. So money supply this line means fixed. It's not affected by those other economic variables like the interest rates. So the government sets that, or the central bank sets that. What about the demand for money? Well, okay, first an aside on real variables. We like to work with real variables rather than nominal variables. In other words, variables that are adjusted for price levels, because otherwise when you say that you're putting huge amounts of money into a health system, for example, but you're not accounting for changes in prices, it could be that a lot of the extra money apparently is just the value of prices rising in health services, and you're not really putting much real drug purchasing power in. You're just manipulating things some way, but it's hard to imagine a government would ever do that. So the same means to the money market. So when we talk about real money, we mean this: money divided by the price level. So the and P is a measure of average prices in the economy, of which more later. But if the money balance was 100, if there were $100 billion in circulation and the average price of goods was $1, then if you doubled this but also doubled the price of all the goods to $2, then the value of that money would have been unchanged. So that's why we divide by P. So say that if prices increase, that pulls down the real value of money. In other words, it gives you the purchasing power of money. So the price level rises, that means the real money supply falls. Having said that, at the moment, for the remainder of this lecture, we're just still assuming the price level is fixed. So it wouldn't actually make any difference in this situation. But in the next lecture, we'll get rid of that ridiculous assumption and let the price level change. For now, it's fixed. So looking at the money supply, so here we've got the amount of money supply in terms of real money divided by P, and here's the interest rate, which is, you can conceive, I'll explain why, as the price of money. So the money supply is fixed, so it's pretty boring. Yeah. So if the government or the central bank decides to increase the money supply, this whole line would just go off this way. If they decide to cut it, it just goes off that way. So it's not influenced by the interest rate, it's just a straight line like that. So that's money supply. Not very exciting. Demand for money is where you get more interest. Oh, not a good term to use. So, in Keynes' theory, this theory of liquidity preference says that the demand for money is determined by two factors: the interest rates and also the output and income in the economy. That's because people may often, if you have money, your wealth in money, there are other places you can put your wealth rather than cash, which will give you a higher rate of interest, higher rate of return. So why would anyone have any cash? And the answer is you will have cash because you want to buy and sell stuff. So in terms, you're sacrificing some possible earnings in terms of interest for this convenience of being able to do transactions. The opportunity cost, central concept in economics, is the interest for money. It's the interest that you could earn on interest earning access. So I've got $1,000 in my pocket. The opportunity cost of that is how much interest would I get if I had that in bonds or shares or in a high interest account. If the interest rate goes up, that raises the opportunity cost to me of holding money. So any money that I've got in my normal current account I can use easily for transactions. As the interest rate goes up, then I'm losing out because I could be putting that into a high interest account or bonds or stocks or other investments, and instead it's sitting in my current account on a piddly amount of interest, the reason I'm doing that is so I can spend it easily. So if the interest rate goes up, I'm going to get to the stage where I think, hey, let me put some of this money into a different form, into bonds or shares, because the interest rate is really big there. So if that happens, the quantity of money demand is reduced. So high interest rate up here means I'd rather have my wealth in other forms, in bonds or stocks or shares or land or something that's going to earn me this high interest rate. Whereas if interest rates collapse, then all that stuff's not really going to earn me very much. So in that case, I might as well just have it in cash or in my standard current account so I can spend it easily. So as interest rates come down, I demand a whole bunch of money. As interest rates go up, I demand less money and keep my wealth in other forms. So you're going to have some sort of inverse relationship like this. This is the way you write it formally. This is money demand adjusted by the price level. The demand for that is equal to LR. It's determined by the interest rate. As I said. So as this goes up, my demand for money falls. As it goes down, my demand for money increases. So L stands for liquidity. My demand for liquid money. So if the interest rate here, so given this demand, this diagram then says, well, that's my demand for money at various different interest rates. This is what the government or the central bank is supplying, so that then is going to be the equilibrium rate. If the government cut the money supply, in this picture, if they said, let's slash the money supply, what happens to the equilibrium interest rate? So just have a look at the diagram, go for one of those, pause the recording. I'll give you the answer now. And the answer is that ooh, that's not a very straight line. This moves this way. Oh dear. So the equilibrium rate goes here. I don't think I can draw R2 or D2. There we go. So interest rate would rise like this. Yeah, that's what you should have got. So the interest rate would rise with a fall because there's less money available. So in order for me to be happy with having, or consumers as a whole, or actors in the economy as a whole, to be happy holding less money, the interest rates would have to be higher. And once you get more into this, you'll see the mechanism through which that would happen. Because people are then having to hold their wealth in other interest rate forms where they really wanted to have, at this interest rate, more cash. So to make them happy with that, you have to give them a higher rate of return on those other investments or potential investments. But there's a further wrinkle to this, which is the demand for money doesn't only depend on the interest rate, it depends on the other stuff you want to do with your money. You don't have money as a form of wealth just to earn whatever interest you can get. You also want to do stuff, buy and sell with it. It's a medium of exchange. The volume of transactions is related to or captured by the overall level of income. So the higher the level of income, the more stuff's going on in the economy, the greater the demand for money, fairly clearly. So the full version of this demand for money is the demand for liquid money, L, is equal to R, and also income. And these things work in different ways. The higher the level of interest rates, that says, hey, look, you shouldn't have so much of your wealth in money because you're losing out on possible interest you could get from stocks and shares. So as this gets bigger, L gets smaller. But the other influence is this: as more is going on in the economy, it says, hey, all these transactions are happening. When this goes up, you need more money. So an increase in Y pushes this up, an increase in R pulls it down. So they're acting in opposite directions. So here's the LM curve. And here you're looking at the combinations of these two factors that lead you to equilibrium in that money market. And there's the equation. That's got to be equal to that. So here's that market for real money balances we had before. There's the government set the supply, or the central bankers set the supply. Let's suppose that here's the initial situation. That's money that's demanded. So here's where we're trying to get to, is working out what's going on in this space, or this relationship between R and Y. This is the same diagram as we saw the IS curve on a while ago. We're looking at, in the IS curve, you're looking at the demand for real goods and services, the balance of investment and saving. We found there's a downward sloping relationship that gives you an equilibrium there. That's the demand for real goods and services. Now we're looking at demand for this weird thing called money that we use to do our transactions with. So imagine that we start with an initial level of income here. For this level of income, that gives you the resulting demand for money. So if you fix income, the only thing that's going to change the demand for money is this R. And as R goes up, you want more money. As R goes down, you want less. Given the government supplying you this much, here's the fixed interest rates. So that's the equilibrium interest rate. So on this diagram, you're here. So that's a starting position for this curve. And then you simply say, well, what happens if income were to rise like this, for a number of reasons? What would happen here to keep this in equilibrium? Well, what happens is that although we know that this is downward sloping, so as interest rates fall, you want more money and vice versa. If you then change this factor, if you increase, then for any value of interest rates, you need more money to do these transactions. So that, as this goes through here, the whole line moves up for any value of R. So in order to keep an equilibrium, because that's the supply of money there is, it's going to have to come to here, so interest rates will have to rise to get to this point. So that the combinations here look like being on an upward curve. So these combinations here are the combinations of output and interest rates where there's equilibrium in the money market. So the liquid money market is an equilibrium on this curve here. What affects the sensitivity of that? Well, it's a slightly harder question. If you imagine you had a country where L, so that's this line here in this money market, if that's very, very sensitive to changes in Y, in other words, if Y changes a bit, then that L curve really moves a long way. In those countries, will the LM curve over here be steeper, less steep, higher, lower, the same? I'm not sure. Have a look at this, see what you think you go for, and I'll try and show you the answer in a moment. Pause the video, think, and then start the video, and here's the answer. Well, you can draw it on this. If it was very sensitive, then instead of going to here, turn this back on, it would have gone up to somewhere like this, oops, which means that the interest rate for this new level of income, this is going to be a real mess. Would it be, oops, yeah, that's terrible. I can probably draw a straight line, so anyway. So R would have had to go up higher to here. Yeah. So instead of going to here, it would have gone up the new interest rate to here. So the LM curve would be going through like that. Yeah. So the LM curve would be steeper. So for a given change in income, you need a bigger change in interest rates, because in this model, in this country, an increase in, it must be a country where there's a lot of transactions done by cash, with money, and a lot of separate transactions perhaps, so, or the financial system is not so not so sophisticated. So in a sophisticated economy, the same money can be recycled many times to do lots of transactions, whereas in this economy it isn't. But for various reasons, the same increase in income, people need more money for that, which means this moves up higher. So the interest rate has to increase by more to keep balancing the money market. So this curve is steeper. So it will be A. Okay. It's the next slide. Okay. Here's some reasons why it's upward sloping. So, as you increase income, you need more money to do all the transactions, but the money supply is fixed, so there isn't any more money. So people want more money, but they can't have any more. So the interest rate must rise to restore equilibrium in the money market, to make people happy to have less money, to have these other alternatives to money. The interest rate on those alternatives must increase. So finally, if you put both these lines on the same map of Y versus R, then you have the ISLM model. So interest and savings, that's the market for real goods, and here the market for money, and liquid money. So the red one, so the blue one is the only combinations of Y and R which give income in this market, the blue one, the real goods and services market, equating investment as saving. And money market is the red curve. These are the only combinations of interest rates and output that give equilibrium in the money market. So the only place where both markets are in equilibrium is here. So it specifies what interest rates and national income will be in that economy is entirely given by these considerations of the real market and the money market. So let's close by having an example of how you can apply that, a simple analysis of fiscal policy, which is a rise in government spending. So as we've seen with government spending, a rise in that moves the IS curve right. So when you're getting used to this is a fundamental thing, that an expansionary increase in fiscal policy, a rising GDP moves IS to the right. So that could be an increase in spending or a cut in taxes. If you're cutting spending or increasing taxes, it goes the other way. But here we're raising taxes, so fiscal expansion takes IS curve this way. That distance it travels is the full distance of the multiplier, causing output and income to rise. Now, if you don't know about interest rates, you ignore all that. You think, hey, look, I'm going to get this big boost to national income by the full multiplier amount. But now we take interest rates into account, it doesn't quite work, because, as you can see, doing this, as income rises, the rise for money demand, people say all these transactions are going on, we need more money. There's only a fixed amount of money, so the interest rate has to rise to keep the money market in equilibrium. So interest rate goes to here. So we actually, because the interest rate goes up, that takes off some private investment, because that depends on interest rates. So you don't get this full boost you expected before, because you lose some private investment because of this higher interest rate. So you end up here instead of over here. So the actual increase you get is smaller than the multiplier predicts, because of that loss of investment due to the high interest rates. So this is a much more sophisticated analysis than the simple Keynesian cross one, because it takes effect of the change in interest rates, which, as we know, is actually really important in the economy. This is known as crowding out. So taking account of interest rates changes the understanding of policy. Government spending increases, there is an increase in national income, but because interest rates rise, there's a fall in investment, so it reduces the income gain. So the government use of resources in the economy effectively crowds out private investment. That's one way of looking at that effect. And that's a major argument used by people that think that the government shouldn't use fiscal policy as a means of stimulating the economy. People that tend to oppose that kind of policy, they often talk about the government crowding out private actors. So this is the crowding out effect here, we can see. And clearly, one thing that affects that is the slope of LM. So, to summarise, what's fiscal policy? Well, that's the area of how much the government's going to spend and how it's going to raise, how much revenue it will raise. How does it relate to growth? Well, through influencing short-term demand via government spending and taxation. How does it affect the economy? Well, there's something called the government spending multiplier, which is the idea that every extra unit of currency the government puts in and much of that is spent and then respent and then respent. Similarly for taxation, if it takes the money out, some of that would have been spent and would have been spent and would have been spent. So these multipliers can affect demand in the economy. But then when we look at the role of interest rates have an effect on demand, especially investment. So if you increase interest rates, they reduce investment. And they also tend to work against the effect of fiscal policy. So they make fiscal policy less effective. Because while you do get the boost from an increase in government demand, essentially government demand for national productive resources, some of that is then squeezed out because the resources that private sector would have used, they don't use so much because the rise in interest rates has put them off. Okay, so next lecture we'll pick up from this through looking at the areas we didn't cover, which is about, these areas of monetary policy. So controlling money supply, controlling banking policy and interest rates. That's picked up in the next lecture. Okay, thanks very much for watching.